right, up next, let's get talking about modulations and secondary dominants. I'm excited. This is one of the compositional harmonic tricks that I use the most, and the more you use it, the more sense it's going to make, the more accessible to you it's going to be. So let's first talk about what a modulation is, and then get talking about secondary dominants as a form of modulation. Modulation is essentially starting off in one key. So let's say we're starting in G major, and I want to move into some sort of other scale or key. For example, maybe I want to move to E minor. But the question is, how do I get to E minor? It's sort of like the door is locked and I need some sort of key to be able to open the door. Well, what we're going to use is a particular chord as that key. So when we talked before about a dominant seventh chord, in other words, a chord that is a major chord with a flat 7, one tone below the octave, this chord fell by a fifth, and that's how it resolved. Well, wherever your destination is, let's say again it's E minor, you just take 1/5 above your destination, in this case B, and you play a dominant seventh chord built off of that note. So again, we're in G major and I want to get to E minor. I'm going to use B dominant 7 to get me there. Let's just listen for a moment. I'll do a very small composition and you'll see how this B7 takes us into E minor. Now we're in E minor. Now E minor was a very specific choice on my end because it happens to be the relative minor scale. Remember before I mentioned that if you start a major scale on the 6th note and then from there you go all the way up to the 6th note, keeping all the same notes that you had in your major scale. So in this case we had G major, now we're choosing E minor. Well, starting from the 6th and going to the 6th gives you the relative minor scale. So in this case, E minor has 1 sharp, and it's the relative minor scale to G major. So I took us from G major into E minor by using E minor's 5 chord, the dominant 7th chord built off of the 5th. And it takes us there beautifully. Now let's just go through G major for a moment and rediscover what the chords are that are available. G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, and then we're back to G major. So with the exception of F sharp diminished, all of the other chords that were mentioned would be great destinations for your modulation. In other words, if I'm in G major and I want the next part of my song to sound like it has a new do, and maybe I don't want to keep it major, maybe I want to have a minor sound, well, I would get to one of these available chords that we just discussed by using the dominant 5 chord of that destination. I'll give you another example. We're still in G major, and we want to get to this 3rd chord, but we don't want it to sound like it's wanting to pull back to G. We want B to sound like the new do. Maybe I have a whole middle section of a song that I want to write in B minor. So how do I get to B minor? Well, I would use the 5 chord. In this case, F sharp. So B is our destination. A perfect 5th, 7 semitones above is F sharp. So if I play F sharp dominant 7, a major chord with a tone below the octave, that's going to be the sound or the chord that takes us to B minor. Here's an example. So I'm actually going to start this example with G major 1-5-1. So we really feel like we're in G. Then I'm going to play the 5 of B minor. This might also be a good time to mention, because B minor is our 3 chord in relation to G, our home key, we say that we're using the 5 of 3. It's the same as saying the 5 of B minor. It's just a little bit more true to how we discuss harmony with these Roman numerals. So we're going to do a 5 of 3 modulation. Let's try it out. 1, 5, 1, 5 of 3 to the 3. Now now it sounds like we're in B minor. So you'll hear these terms 5 of 3, 5 of 6, 5 of 5. All they're talking about is the idea of getting to the 3, the 6, or the 5 chord by using the 5 of that destination, right? So if I'm in G major and I want to get to the 2 chord, A minor, I use the 5 of that 2 chord. So A minor, it's 5, is E dominant, which takes us to A minor. Now often the big question is, how do we get back to G major? Tick, 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 tick. Any guesses? It's the 5 of the 1 chord. So a lot of people will ask, how do we get back to G major? It's pretty simple for the most part. You just play the 5 of 1 and that will take you back to 1. So you play the 5 of G major, D dominant 7, and that will take you back to G. So that is the basic idea of modulations, and the modulations specifically that we discussed are called secondary dominant chords. In other words, a dominant 7th chord that isn't built off of the 5 of our home key. In other words, the 5 of our 1. It's the 5 of the 2 chord, or the 5 of the 3 chord, or the 5 of the 4 chord, so on and so forth. Again, you just don't want to land on that diminished. It's just not going to give you a resolved sound when you get to that diminished chord. So generally this works best when your destination is a pretty straight up major chord or minor chord. It can also work with the major 7th and the minor 7th chords that we discussed prior. Also, in a previous class, we've discussed how this dominant 7th chord is built up of the 5 of our home key and also the diminished 7 of our home key. In the case of C major, it's like fusing a G major chord and a B diminished chord. So if the 5 chord, G, or even G dominant, pulls down a 5th to resolve, we can also determine that the diminished chord built off of the 7th note likes to pull up a semitone, and it can pull up a semitone to a major or a minor chord. So the same philosophy applies. Back to G major, we pick any key that we want to modulate to. Let's say it's D, the 5. Well, you would just play a diminished chord 1 semitone below your destination, and that will pull you into your destination. Same idea if I go 1 and I'm trying to get to my 6, E minor, I could modulate using a D sharp diminished chord to pull me into the E minor chord. Like I said, diminished chords pull up a semitone to a new major 1 chord or minor 1 chord, but generally they sound most acceptable going to your minor 1 chord. Not that they won't sound great going to a major 1 chord, but you just hear diminished harmony a whole lot more within the minor key setting. So I'm going to give 4 or 5 random examples of modulations using our dominant 5 chord, secondary dominance, or a diminished chord pulling up 1 semitone to a new destination. Let's try it out. It's all going to be in G major for now. So G major, let's go to the 4, which is C. So I just turn this to a dominant chord because it just so happens that G dominant is the 5 of C major. So that would look like this. Sounds nice, and it feels like I'm in C now. Let's try it again. This time we'll go to E minor, and again we'll use a diminished chord 1 semitone below. Sounds nice. Here's another one, G major to A minor. Let's just use a diminished chord right in between those two because that pulls up a semitone to A minor in this case. So 1, the diminished 7th chord of our 2 into the 2 chord. Here's another one. G major, let's do the 5 of 6. Here's the 5 chord, B dominant of E minor, our 6 chord. One last one. We're in G major. I'm going to play the 5 of 5. In other words, A dominant taking us to D. Let's make a D dominant to take us back to G. So dominant 7th chords can act as modulators by falling a 5th into a new key, and diminished or diminished 7th chords can act as modulators by pulling up a semitone into some new key, and the destination, the key that you're moving into, is going to sound best if it's in relation to your home key. So in G major, you would want to modulate likely to A minor, B minor, C major, D major, or E minor. Those are secondary dominant modulations with a little splash of diminished modulations. I hope you enjoyed that. Use it a lot, and if you want an artist that is the master of this stuff, check out Bach's music, because it's almost like every second bar he's modulating into a new key. So if you're working with a teacher, do a harmonic analysis of one of Bach's prelude and fugues, or anything by Bach really. You're going to end up picking up some of his modulation tricks. I'll see you in the next class.